Maria Delgado woke up before the sun rose that morning. She lived in a small apartment on the edge of town, where the city noise faded into quiet streets and early birds sang their songs. Her room was simple, just enough space for a bed, a tiny dresser, and a shelf filled with old music books she had collected over the years. Maria wasn't rich or famous. She worked 6 days a week cleaning offices at a community center not far from her home. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave her time to think and sing. She loved singing more than anything else. When she was young, her grandmother used to hum old songs while cooking, and Maria would try to match her voice. As she grew older, she found herself humming along to the radio, then singing out loud when no one was around. At church, she joined the choir just so she could feel what it was like to sing in front of people. Her voice wasn't trained, but it was full of heart. People who heard her often said, "You should do something with that voice." But Maria never thought she could. She didn't have money for lessons or outfits or fancy equipment. She didn't know anyone in the music world. She didn't even own a microphone. Still, deep inside, she dreamed, not of being rich or famous, but of sharing her voice with others, of standing on a stage and singing until everyone felt what she felt. One day, while cleaning a hallway, she saw a poster on the wall. It was an open call audition for a big singing competition. The prize was a chance to perform on national television and win a recording contract. Maria stared at it for a long time. Her hands were still holding the mop, but her heart started beating faster. She read the details again and again. The auditions were happening in just a few days. She could go. She should go. That night, after finishing dinner and washing the dishes, she sat down at her little desk and wrote her name on a piece of paper. Then she circled the date of the audition and taped it to the mirror. That was her way of making it real. The next few days passed slowly. Maria practiced whenever she could, in the shower, while walking to work, even during her lunch break when she found a quiet corner. She chose a song that had always moved her, a classical piece she had heard once on TV. It was hard, much harder than anything she usually sang, but she believed she could do it. She listened to recordings online and tried to copy the style, though she didn't understand all the technical terms. Still, she kept trying. On the morning of the audition, Maria got up extra early. She wore her best dress, a plain blue one she had bought from a second-hand store. She brushed her hair neatly and put on a little makeup, just enough to feel confident. She packed her sheet music in a folder that had seen better days and slipped on her worn-out shoes. She looked in the mirror one last time, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "This is your moment." When she arrived at the building, it was already buzzing with energy. People were everywhere, some dressed in flashy clothes, others rehearsing lines or warming up their voices. Maria stood quietly near the back, watching and listening. She noticed how many contestants seemed sure of themselves, how they laughed, and joked like they belonged there. She felt small among them, but she reminded herself why she had come. As the line moved forward, Maria watched each performer step onto the stage and sing. Some were amazing, trained singers with perfect pitch and powerful voices. Others struggled, forgetting lyrics or cracking under pressure. The judges were tough, giving quick feedback and sometimes shaking their heads before the singer even finished. Maria's name wasn't called for a long time. She waited patiently, sitting on a bench and quietly going over her lyrics in her head. She watched everything, the way people held themselves, how the lights shined on the stage, how the judges reacted. She learned without saying a word. When it was finally her turn, Maria stood up slowly and walked toward the stage. She could feel eyes on her. Some contestants raised their eyebrows. A few exchanged smirks. One even whispered loudly, "Is this a joke?" Maria heard it, but she didn't look back. She climbed the steps, stepped into the spotlight, and stood alone in front of the panel. The judges barely looked up at first. One was scrolling through his phone. Another was talking to a producer. The third tapped his pen impatiently. Maria smiled politely and said, "Hello, my name is Maria Delgado, and I'll be singing O mio babino caro today." A few people in the audience chuckled softly. It was a bold choice, a classical aria, not the usual pop or rock songs these competitions favored. Maria ignored the reaction. She nodded to the pianist, took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment. Then, she opened her mouth and sang. It started softly, like a whisper carried by the wind. But as the note grew, something changed in the room. The sound that came from Maria wasn't just pretty, it was strong, clear, and full of emotion. It touched something deep inside everyone who heard it. The judge with the phone dropped it onto the table. The one who had been talking turned fully toward her. Even the camera crew paused filming for a second. Caught off guard, Maria didn't notice. She was too focused on the music, too lost in the feeling. For those few minutes, she wasn't just a cleaner from a small apartment. She was a singer, a true artist, and she was finally being heard. By the time she reached the high note, the entire room was silent, no whispers, no laughter, just awe, and that was only the beginning. The silence after Maria's first note felt like forever, even though it was only a second or two. The air in the room changed, like someone had turned down the volume on life itself. Everyone was still. Some people leaned forward just a little, as if trying to understand what they were hearing. Others looked at each other with wide eyes, not sure how to react. But before that moment could settle, one of the judges, a man named Rick, who was known for his sharp tongue and loud opinions, let out a short laugh. He didn't try to hide it. "Well," he said, looking at the other judges, "that's unexpected." Another judge, a woman named Lena, who dressed like she belonged on a fashion show stage, rolled her eyes but smiled. She wasn't mean, but she was used to polished performers, people who knew how to work a stage, wear the right outfit, and speak confidently. Maria didn't look like any of them. Her dress was simple, her shoes worn, and her voice. Well, no one expected that from someone who looked like she worked 5 jobs just to get by. From the wings, where the other contestants waited their turn, a few more laughs rose. One girl whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Did she really think she could do this?" Another contestant gave a fake cough and mimed cleaning the floor with a mop, making a couple of others giggle. Maria heard some of it, not every word, but enough. She kept her eyes on the judges, but her hands tightened around the folder she held. Her heart pounded hard in her chest, not from fear, but from something deeper, something like pride and pain mixed together. She had known this might happen. People often judged before they listened. She had been laughed at before, not just for singing, but for dreaming too big when her world was so small. But she also knew something most of them didn't. Talent doesn't come with labels. It doesn't care about clothes or money or background, it just is. And hers was real. Rick picked up his pen again and waved a hand. "All right, let's hear the rest. Maybe she's got a trick or two." His voice was playful, but there was a hint of doubt behind it. Maria took another deep breath. She nodded to the pianist, who played the next few notes. Then she sang again, and this time her voice carried even more strength. It was like she had found her footing now, like she had stepped into a place where nothing else mattered except the music. As the song went on, something strange happened. The laughter stopped completely. The whispers faded. Even the camera crew, who had gone back to filming after the initial surprise, seemed more focused, zooming in slightly on Maria instead of the usual wide shots. Her voice was powerful, yes, but it was more than that. It was full of feeling. Every word she sang came from somewhere deep inside her, like she had lived every line of the song and wanted to share that truth with everyone listening. One of the crew members, a young guy who usually didn't pay much attention to early auditions, paused mid-task and stared at the monitor. He nudged the person next to him and pointed. "Who is that?" No one answered. They were all too busy listening. Backstage, the mood had shifted too. Where moments ago there had been jokes and eye rolls, now there was quiet. The contestants stood in a line watching through the curtains. Some looked confused, others impressed. A few simply stared, mouths slightly open. "Wait, is she actually good?" one of them whispered. She's not just good, another replied, frowning. She's really good. On stage, Maria reached the highest note of the song. It rang, out across the auditorium like a bell, clear, strong, and perfectly held. For a moment, the whole world seemed to pause just to hear it. Then, silence. For a long beat, no one moved. No one clapped. It was like everyone was afraid to break the spell. Then slowly applause began. At first it was soft and unsure, like people were testing whether it was okay to clap. But then it grew louder, faster, stronger. People stood up. Some cheered, others wiped their eyes without realizing it. Maria finally opened her eyes. She looked around, surprised. She hadn't noticed how many people were watching, or how deeply they had been moved. Rick, who had started off smirking, now sat with both elbows on the table, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Lena had her hand over her heart. The third judge, a quiet older man named James, gave a slow nod of approval. Rick cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Okay," he said, his voice softer now. "That was not what I was expecting." Lena nodded. "Your voice," she said, choosing her words carefully. "It's not just beautiful. It's emotional. Real." James added, "You have something rare, Maria. You don't always find that kind of honesty in a performance." Maria blinked, stunned. She had prepared herself for criticism, maybe even rejection. But this was something else. She smiled shyly and said, "Thank you. I love singing. I've always loved it." Rick chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, you just made sure we won't forget that anytime soon." A few people in the audience laughed softly, but it was different now, warm and friendly, not mocking. Behind the curtain, the other contestants stood quietly. Some looked disappointed, others thoughtful. One of the girls who had laughed earlier turned away, suddenly embarrassed. Maria didn't see any of that. She just saw the faces of the judges, the lights above the stage, and the crowd beyond. And, for the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged. As she walked off the stage, the applause followed her like a wave. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She just walked, holding her head high. And as she passed the other contestants backstage, she caught a few looks, some filled with respect, others with surprise. But none of it mattered anymore, because Maria Delgado had sung, and the world had finally listened. The moment Maria stepped off the stage, everything felt different. The air was lighter, but her heart still beat fast. She could hardly believe what had just happened. For years, she had dreamed of singing in front of people who would really listen. Now, it had finally happened, and in the most unexpected way. Backstage, the other contestants stood around in small groups, whispering. Some looked at her with new eyes. Others avoided her gaze, maybe feeling a little ashamed for how they had acted earlier. A few even smiled politely, though no one said much. Maria didn't mind the silence. She had never come here to prove anyone wrong. She had only wanted to sing. A crew member approached her with a clipboard and asked if she could stay for a short interview after the auditions were done. "You made quite an impression," he said with a smile. Maria nodded shyly, unsure what that meant but happy to agree. On stage, the next contestant tried to shake off the lingering energy from Maria's performance. But as soon as the music started, everyone seemed a little distracted. It was like her voice had left something behind, a kind of hush, a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. After the last audition ended, the camera crew moved quickly. Lights shifted, microphones were adjusted, and soon Maria found herself standing alone under a bright spotlight, holding a microphone she wasn't used to. "Maria," the host began, "can you tell us a little about yourself?" She smiled nervously and said, "Sure. I live here in the city. I work at a community center cleaning offices. I've always loved singing, but this is the first time I've ever done anything like this." The host gave a warm nod. "Well, you certainly surprised everyone today. How did you feel when you walked out on stage?" Maria thought for a second. I was nervous, of course, but I also knew why I was there. I wanted to share my voice, that's all. Her answer was simple, but it touched something in the people watching. Even the host looked a little moved. Then came the real surprise. The judges joined them on stage, and one by one, they spoke. Rick, the judge who had laughed at first, now looked serious. "Maria," he said, "you caught us off guard. We weren't expecting someone like you to walk in and deliver a performance like that." Maria smiled politely, not sure how to respond. Lena added, "What you have is rare. You sang with your heart, not just your voice, and that matters more than most people realize." James, the older judge, simply said, "You reminded me why we do this, to find true talent. And you, Maria, are truly talented." Applause rose again from the audience. Maria blinked back a tear, touched by their words. As the interview wrapped up, the host turned to the camera and said, "We'll see you all next week when we reveal who moves on to the next round." Lights dimmed. People began to pack up. The crew thanked Maria and told her they'd be in touch soon. She walked outside into the cool night air, taking a deep breath. The city lights sparkled above the busy streets. She had no idea what would happen next, but she felt lighter somehow, like a weight she had carried for years had finally lifted. The next morning, Maria woke up early as usual. She got dressed, ate breakfast, and headed to work. No one at the community center knew what had happened the day before. She didn't tell anyone, not yet. But later that afternoon, her phone buzzed nonstop. First with a message from her cousin, "OMG. Maria, your video is going crazy online." Then another from a childhood friend, "Are you famous now? I saw you on social media." Confused, Maria opened her phone and clicked on a link. There it was, her audition, already shared thousands of times. Comments poured in from all over the world. "This woman has the voice of an angel. She deserves every chance. Never judge someone by how they look." Tears. Real tears. Maria stared at the screen, stunned. She hadn't expected this. She had just come to sing. By the end of the day, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. People she hadn't heard from in years sent messages. Her church pastor called to say everyone was proud of her. Even the director of the community center stopped her during her shift. "I saw you on TV," he said with a grin. "You made us all proud." Maria smiled, grateful but overwhelmed. Over the next few days, things moved fast. She got a call from the show's producers, telling her she had advanced to the next round. Then came calls from music agents, local radio stations, and even a few reporters asking for interviews. One evening, she sat down with a reporter from a popular entertainment channel. They talked for nearly an hour, and when it aired, millions watched. Maria stayed humble through it all. She never forgot where she came from. She kept working until her final shift, then packed a small bag for the next phase of the competition. When she returned to the studio for the next round, things were different. People greeted her by name. Contestants who once laughed now shook her hand. Rick, the judge who had doubted her, gave her a thumbs up as she walked past. And when Maria took the stage again, she didn't feel like the same woman who had walked in with worn-out shoes and a dusty folder. She felt like a singer, like someone who had earned her place. And when she sang again, the whole room listened, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because Maria Delgado had a voice worth hearing, and now the world was finally listening. Maria's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The moment her audition aired on television, the whole world seemed to stop and listen. Clips of her singing were shared across social media platforms by the millions. People from different countries watched her performance again and again, moved not just by her voice but by her story. Fans started sending messages online. Some said they cried when they heard her sing. Others wrote about how inspired they felt, how Maria reminded them that dreams don't belong only to the rich or the famous. A young girl from a small town in South America wrote, "I sing too, even though no one thinks I'm good enough. But after watching you, I won't stop trying." Another message came from an older man who had once dreamed of being a musician, but gave up because he thought he was too old. He wrote, "You made me believe that maybe it's never too late. Maria read every message she could. She didn't know how to respond to all of them, but she tried to reply with kindness. She wanted people to know that if someone like her, a simple woman who cleaned offices for a living, could step onto a big stage and be heard, then anyone could. Back at the competition, things became more intense. Each round brought new challenges. Contestants had to learn harder songs, perform live with full bands, and face tougher judges. But Maria stayed calm. She didn't let the pressure get to her. She kept doing what she had always done, singing with her heart. As the weeks passed, more people began recognizing her. When she walked into the studio, crew members greeted her with smiles. Reporters waited outside for quick interviews. Even fans sometimes showed up just to see her walk in. But Maria stayed humble. She remembered where she came from. She still talked to the staff kindly, thanked the makeup artists, and even helped clean up a little backstage if she saw something out of place. One day, after a long rehearsal, she sat down with Lena, the judge who had once looked surprised by her talent, and asked, "How did I get this far?" Lena smiled warmly. "Because you're real," she said. "People can feel that you don't pretend to be someone you're not, and that's rare." Maria thought about those words for a long time. She realized that while some contestants tried to impress with flashy outfits or complex songs, she had simply been herself. And that was powerful. The show's producers noticed her growing popularity and decided to do a special feature on her background. Cameras followed her back to her neighborhood, showing the streets she walked every day, the small apartment she lived in, and even the community center where she used to clean offices. When the episode aired, viewers were touched. They saw Maria helping kids in the church choir, teaching them how to breathe properly and hold notes. They saw her cooking dinner for her younger cousin, laughing as they sang together in the kitchen. They saw her sitting on the edge of her bed, quietly practicing lines before sleep. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and people loved her for it. Soon, offers started coming in, not just from the music industry, but from other places. Too. A famous orchestra invited her to perform as a guest soloist. A major record label reached out asking if she would be interested in recording her own album. A children's charity called and asked if she would become their ambassador, using her voice to help raise money for underprivileged kids. Maria couldn't believe it. Just months ago, she had been cleaning floors. Now, people wanted to hear her sing on stages around the world. She didn't say yes to everything right away. She took time to think, to talk to her family, to pray and reflect. She wanted to make sure whatever she did next felt right, not just for her career, but for her heart. When she finally made her decision, she chose to continue with the competition, not for the prize, but for the experience. She knew there was still so much to learn. She also agreed to work with the charity, helping children find joy in music just like she had when she was young. And when the final show came, Maria stood on the biggest stage of her life. The auditorium was packed. Thousands watched live and millions tuned in from home. The lights were bright, the cameras rolled, and the judges sat with serious expressions. But Maria didn't feel nervous anymore. She looked out at the crowd and smiled. She saw faces filled with hope, with love, with belief in her. She stepped forward, closed her eyes, and sang. Her voice filled the room like wind through trees. Soft at first, then strong and full of life. Every note carried meaning. Every word told a story. When she finished, silence fell again. Then slowly the entire audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the hall. Tears shone in many eyes. Even the judges stood up, clapping with deep respect. Maria looked around, her heart full. She had come so far, not just from the small stage of her first audition, but from the quiet corners of her everyday life. She had found her voice, and now the world was listening. A year had passed since Maria stood on that final stage and sang her heart out. Life had changed in ways she never thought possible, but somehow she remained the same at her core. A simple woman who loved to sing and believed in kindness above all else. She now lived in a modest apartment not far from where she used to clean offices. The room was bigger, yes, and filled with things she once only dreamed of. Recording equipment, framed photos of her performances, and letters from fans all over the world. But her favorite thing in the room wasn't any of those things. It was the old folder of sheet music she had carried to her first audition. She kept it on her desk as a reminder of where she came from. Maria's voice had traveled far. Her performance on the show had gone viral again when a famous symphony orchestra invited her to perform with them in Europe. She sang on grand stages, under golden lights, wearing beautiful gowns and standing beside some of the most respected musicians in the world. Yet no matter how big the crowd or how fancy the event, she always remembered the small moments that made her who she was. Back home, she returned often. She visited her church, where children still waited eagerly for her to sing with them. She walked through the neighborhood where she grew up, stopping to chat with shopkeepers and neighbors who had known her long before she became well known. And she always made time to visit the community center where she used to work. One day, she walked into the same building where she had seen that life-changing poster on the wall. This time, instead of holding a mop, she held a microphone. She had come to surprise the kids in the after-school program with a special music workshop. The children were excited. Some recognized her immediately and shouted her name. Others just stared, eyes wide, like they couldn't believe she was really there. Maria smiled warmly and said, "Hey everyone, I used to clean this place every day. Now I'm here to help you find your voices." She spent the afternoon teaching them songs, helping them breathe properly, and telling them stories about her own journey. She told them that she hadn't started singing to become famous. She had started because it made her happy, and because music had always felt like home. At the end of the session, one little girl raised her hand and asked, "Did people ever laugh at you?" Maria nodded gently. "Yes, sometimes they did," she said, "but I didn't let that stop me. I just kept singing." Another boy asked, "Were you ever scared?" "Every time I stepped onto a new stage," she admitted. "But I learned that being nervous doesn't mean you can't do something great." Afterward, the kids performed a short song they had been practicing. Maria joined in softly, harmonizing with their voices. When they finished, they all clapped and cheered. One girl ran up and hugged her tightly. "You made me feel brave," the girl whispered. Maria smiled and whispered back, "You already were brave. You just needed someone to remind you." Outside, the sun was setting. The sky turned pink and orange, casting a warm glow over the city. As Maria walked back to her car, she looked around and felt deeply grateful. She had everything she had ever wanted, not money or fame, but a chance to share her love of music and help others find their own voices. In the months that followed, Maria continued to grow as an artist. She recorded her first album, filled with songs that touched the heart, some classical, some soulful, and some written by her own hand. Fans loved it. Critics praised her honesty and emotion, and more importantly, young singers around the world found hope in her music. She also started a small foundation to help children from low-income families learn music. She paid for lessons, instruments, and even small scholarships for those who showed passion. She didn't want anyone to feel like they couldn't chase their dreams just because they didn't have money or connections. When reporters asked her what she wanted next, Maria always gave the same answer: "I just want to keep singing, and I want to help others do the same." She never forgot the moment that started it all, the laughter, the doubt, the silence, and finally, the applause. That day had changed her life forever, but she didn't see herself as someone special. She saw herself as proof that anyone could rise if they just believed in themselves enough to try. Years later, when people looked back on her story, they didn't just remember her voice. They remembered her kindness, her humility, and the way she reminded the world that greatness can come from anywhere. And somewhere, in a quiet room with a window open and birds singing outside, Maria sat at her piano, flipping through her old sheet music. She hummed a tune, then began to play.